In the sterile glow of a military hospital in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a soldier stumbles through the sliding glass doors, his face contorted in agony, clutching a belly so swollen it defies reason. The night is heavy with summer humidity, and the air buzzes with a secret that could unravel everything. Whispers ripple through the hospital staff as they witness the impossible. A man, a soldier no less, appearing 9 months pregnant.
Wat dak trut lis Beneatzes Surreal-Szene?
What could make a seasoned doctor faint at the sight of what's born? The answer is more shocking than anyone could imagine, and it starts with a single, desperate cry echoing through the halls. The chaos began just after midnight, when Private First Class Elliot Harper, a 25-year-old soldier with a boyish face and a buzz cut, staggered into the emergency room, supported by his comrade, Sergeant Mason Reed. Elliot's uniform strained against a belly so large it looked like it belonged to a woman on the verge of giving birth. His breaths came in short, pained gasps, his hands gripping his abdomen as if holding something alive inside. The nurses froze, their eyes wide with disbelief, as Mason shouted for help, his voice raw with panic. "He's in pain. Do something," he bellowed, his own uniform disheveled from the frantic drive to the hospital.
Doctor.
Nathan Caldwell, a veteran obstetrician with 15 years of experience, had just started his shift when the commotion reached him. He was reviewing charts in his office, a cramped space cluttered with medical journals and a faded family photo, when the first scream tore through the hospital. It wasn't the familiar wail of a woman in labor, it was deeper, guttural, undeniably male. Nathan dropped his pen, his heart racing as he sprinted down the corridor, his stethoscope bouncing against his chest. The linoleum floor squeaked under his sneakers as he rounded the corner to the reception area, only to stop dead in his tracks. There, in the harsh fluorescent light, stood Elliot, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wild with pain. His belly was grotesque round, taut, and impossibly prominent, like something out of a medical anomaly textbook. Nathan's mind raced, trying to reconcile the sight with everything he knew about biology.
Men don't get pregnant.
Yet here was Elliot, doubled over, clutching his abdomen as if something were trying to claw its way out.
Get a stretcher.
Nathan barked, snapping the nurses out of their stupor. He knelt beside Elliot, his hands trembling as he asked, "What's happening?
Can you tell ML what you're feeling?"
Elliot's voice was strained, each word punctuated by a grimace. "It hurts so bad right here," he gasped, pressing both hands to his belly. Mason, hovering nearby, filled in the gaps, his voice tight with worry. "It started months ago, Doc." His stomach just grew. He kept saying it was nothing, but today he couldn't even stand up straight. "There's something moving in there, I swear." Nathan's fingers brushed Elliot's abdomen, and he froze. Beneath the taut skin, he felt a distinct kicker sensation he'd only ever felt in pregnant women. His breath caught in his throat. "This can't be," he muttered, his mind scrambling for an explanation. The stretcher arrived, and with Mason's help, they maneuvered Elliot onto it. As they wheeled him toward an exam room, Nathan's thoughts churned. Could Elliot be transgender? It was the only rational explanation, but even that seemed far-fetched given the soldier's muscular build and masculine features. In the exam room, Nathan steadied himself, his professionalism kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. "Elliot, I need you to be honest with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "How long has your stomach been like this? And were you born male?" Elliot's eyes flicked to Mason, then back to Nathan, a flicker of panic crossing his face. 8 months, he rasped. "And yeah, I'm a guy. Always have been." Mason nodded vigorously, his jaw tight. "I've known him for years, Doc."
Wie train togeter, short togeter.
"He's a man, no question." Nathan's confusion deepened, but another kick against Elliot's belly silenced his doubts. Whatever was happening, it was real and urgent. "We're going to ultrasound," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument.
We need to see what's inside you.
The ultrasound room was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, its dim lighting and humming machinery creating an eerie calm. Elliot lay on the table, his breathing shallow as Nathan applied cold gel to his swollen abdomen. Mason stood by, his arms crossed, his face a mask of unease. "This is crazy, right?" he muttered.
It can't be what it looks like.
Nathan didn't respond, his focus on the ultrasound probe. As he moved it across Elliot's skin, the screen flickered to life, revealing shadows that slowly sharpened into something unimaginable. Two tiny forms appeared, their limbs moving faintly, their heartbeats pulsing in sync.
Twins.
Nathan's hands shook, nearly dropping the probe. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible.
Elliot, you're pregnant. With twins.
Mason's jaw dropped, his hand covering his mouth as he stared at the screen. Elliot shook his head violently, his voice rising.
"No. That's impossible. I'm not pregnant."
But before anyone could argue, a gush of fluid spilled onto the table, the unmistakable scent of amniotic fluid filling the air.
Nathans eiswiedend.
"Your water broke," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind.
"We need to get you to surgery. Now."
As they rushed Elliot to the operating room, Nathan's thoughts spiraled. This defied everything he'd learned in medical school, every law of biology. Yet the evidence was undeniable: the kicks, the ultrasound, the amniotic fluid. Elliot was about to give birth, and Nathan had no time to question how or why. In the operating room, the team scrambled to prepare for an emergency C-section, but Elliot's protests grew louder. "No surgery," he shouted, his voice breaking. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it naturally." Nathan exchanged a glance with the anesthesiologist, unsure how to proceed. But before he could argue, Elliot began to push, his screams echoing through the sterile room. What happened next would haunt Nathan for the rest of his career. As Elliot bore down, the truth began to unravel, a secret so shocking it would change everything. The soldier's body revealed something no one expected, a detail that explained the impossible and sent Nathan's world spinning. But to understand how this moment came to be, we need to go back to a sweltering morning in Fort Bragg, before Elliot's belly began to grow, before the mystery consumed them all. 8 months earlier, the sun beat down on Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the air thick with the promise of rain. Private First Class Elliot Harper stood outside a military bus, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, waiting for his best friend, Sergeant Mason Reed. The two had been inseparable since basic training, their bond forged through late-night card games and grueling drills. But today, something was off. Elliot was late, a rarity for the punctual soldier, and Mason's gut churned with unease as he checked his phone for the 10th time.
No texts, no calls. Where was he?
The bus was loaded with soldiers headed for a survival training mission in the dense forests of Pisgah National Forest, a test of mental and physical endurance. Captain Victor Hayes, a stern man in his early 50s with a voice like gravel, barked orders from the front.
"Reed, get on the bus.
We're not waiting for stragglers." Mason hesitated, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Sir, Elliot's not here yet. He's never late."
"The meeting's wrong."
The captain's eyes narrowed, his patience thin. "He's got 5 minutes. After that, we leave without him." Just as Mason opened his mouth to protest, a figure sprinted toward the bus, stumbling over the gravel lot. It was Elliot, his uniform soaked with sweat, his face pale and drawn. "I'm here," he gasped, clutching his side as if in pain. Mason rushed to his side, steadying him. "What happened, man?"
"You look like hell."
Elliot forced a weak smile, brushing off the concern. "Had an accident Friday night.
Woke up in a hospital downtown.
Just got discharged this morning." I'm fine though. Couldn't miss this mission. Captain Hayes approached, his gaze sharp and unyielding.
Pure latte, Harper.
Care to explain? Elliot straightened, saluting despite his obvious discomfort.
Sir, I got hit on the head. Lost a couple days.
It's hazy, but I'm here now. The captain exchanged a glance with Sergeant First Class Logan Pierce, a wiry man with a perpetual scowl. Something unspoken passed between them, a tension Mason couldn't quite place. Get on the bus, Hayes said finally, his tone cold. We'll deal with this later. As the bus rumbled toward the airport, Mason studied his friend. Elliot's face was the same sharp jawline, dark eyes, but something was different. His movements were slower, his gaze distant, as if he were only half present. You sure you're okay? Mason asked, leaning closer. Elliot stared out the window, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee.
Yeah, just a headache. It's nothing.
But Mason wasn't convinced. The Elliot he knew was brash, confident, always ready with a joke. This version was quiet, guarded, almost afraid. The flight to Pisgah was uneventful, but the tension followed them into the forest. The training was brutal, long treks through muddy trails, nights spent under makeshift shelters, and constant vigilance against simulated threats. Elliot struggled from the start, lagging behind the group, his face pale and slick with sweat. During a break, Mason caught him vomiting behind a tree, his hands shaking as he wiped his mouth. You're not fine, Mason said, his voice low but firm. You need to see a medic. Elliot waved him off, his smile strained. It's just a bug, Mason.
I'll check it off.
But as the days passed, Mason noticed other changes. Elliot avoided the communal showers, opting to wash up alone at odd hours. He wore looser uniforms, claiming they were more comfortable in the humid forest. And then there was his stomach, slightly swollen, noticeable when his shirt rode up during a climb. Mason didn't say anything at first, chalking it up to poor diet or stress. But the swelling grew, and so did his unease. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, Mason tried to lighten the mood. Remember that time we snuck into the officers' mess and ate all their leftover pizza? He said, grinning. Elliot stared into the flames, his brow furrowed. Pizza? When was that? Mason's smile faded.
Come on, Mann, you can't forget that. We almost got court-martialed.
Elliot forced a laugh, but his eyes were blank.
Oh yeah, right. Musst we slippet my mindestens. The response sent a chill down Masons Spine.
How could Elliot forget their shared history? Meanwhile, Captain Hayes and Sergeant Pierce watched Elliot from a distance, their conversations hushed and urgent. He shouldn't be here, Pierce muttered one night, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. We saw what happened. No one walks away from that. Hayes's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on Elliot's silhouette. He doesn't remember. But if he does, we're done. We need to make sure he doesn't leave this forest. Mason overheard just enough to know something was wrong. He confronted Elliot the next morning, pulling him aside during a water break.
What's going on with you? You're not yourself. And Hayes and Pierce are reacting weird around you.
Elliot's eyes darted to the ground, his hand instinctively resting on his stomach.
It's nothing, Mason. Just let it go.
But Mason couldn't. The man he'd known for years was slipping away, replaced by someone something didn't recognize. As the mission neared its end, Hayes called Elliot for a solo task: cross the river to retrieve supplies from a remote outpost. Mason protested, knowing Elliot's condition was worsening. Sir, he's sick. Let me go instead. But Pierce cut him off. Orders are orders, Reed. Harper says he's fine. Elliot nodded, his face pale but determined. I got this, he said, climbing into the small boat. Mason watched, his stomach twisting, as Elliot rowed into the misty river, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the surface. The river in Pisgah National Forest was deceptively calm, its surface reflecting the gray sky above. Elliot rowed steadily, his arms straining against the oars, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the boat's interior. He'd noticed something odd when he climbed in a small device tucked under the seat, its wires barely visible. His heart skipped a beat. He'd seen enough in his training to recognize a sabotage device, likely a small explosive meant to sink the boat mid-river. Without hesitation, he pried it loose and tossed it into the water, watching it disappear into the depths. His hands shook, but he kept rowing, his mind racing. Someone wanted him dead. Back on shore, Mason paced, his boots sinking into the muddy bank. He'd seen the look in Captain Hayes's eyes when he gave Elliot the order, cold, calculating, nothing like the stern but fair leader he'd known. Sergeant Pierce was no better, his smirk barely concealed as Elliot's boat vanished into the mist. Mason's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he had no proof, only a gnawing sense of dread. When Elliot returned an hour later, unscathed and carrying the supplies, Mason nearly collapsed with relief. But Hayes and Pierce's faces told a different story: shock, then anger, quickly masked by forced indifference. "What happened out there?" Mason asked as they unpacked the supplies. Elliot shrugged, his eyes avoiding Mason's. "Nothing.
Gotze Stuf, came back."
His voice was flat, but his hand rested on his stomach, which seemed larger than ever under his loose uniform. Mason wanted to press him, but the other soldiers were watching, and Elliot's guarded expression begged for silence. That night, Mason lay awake in his tent, replaying every strange moment since Elliot's return. The accident, the memory loss, the swelling belly, none of it added up. Weeks passed, and the mission dragged on. Elliot's condition worsened, his belly now impossible to hide. The other soldiers whispered behind his back, some joking that he looked pregnant, others speculating about bizarre medical conditions. Elliot brushed it off, claiming it was bloating from bad rations, but his excuses grew weaker as the pain became undeniable. He moved slower, winced during drills, and spent more time alone, staring into the distance as if searching for answers in the trees. Mason's worry turned to desperation. One afternoon, as they hiked through a dense thicket, he pulled Elliot aside. "This isn't bloating, man.
Your stomach's moving.
I saw it.
You need a doctor now."
Elliot's face paled, his hand instinctively covering his abdomen.
"It's fine, Mason.
I'll deal with it when we get back to base." But his voice cracked, and for the first time, Mason saw fear in his friend's eyes. "You're not fine," Mason snapped. "You're hiding something, and it's killing you."
"Tell me what's going on."
Elliot hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the distant figures of Hayes and Pierce.
"Il handle it."
"But don't tell anyone, especially not them." Mason wanted to argue, but the urgency in Elliot's voice stopped him. He nodded reluctantly, his mind racing with questions he couldn't ask. What was Elliot hiding? And why were Hayes and Pierce so fixated on him? Unbeknownst to Mason, Elliot was carrying a secret far bigger than anyone could imagine. The truth went back to that Friday night before the mission, when Elliot had stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see. After finishing his duties at Fort Bragg, he'd gone to Sergeant Pierce's office to drop off a report. The room was empty, but a half-open drawer caught his eye. Inside was a stack of documents, financial records detailing misappropriated funds, siphoned from military budgets into private accounts.
The name is at the bottom, Captain Victor Hayes and Sergeant Logan Pierce. Elliot's blood ran cold.
This was corruption on a massive scale, explaining the substandard gear and meager supplies that had plagued their unit. He snapped a quick photo with his phone, intending to report it, but before he could leave, the door swung open. Hayes and Pierce stood there, their faces darkening as they saw the documents in his hands.
You saw too much, Harper, Hayes growled.
They offered him a cut to stay quiet, but Elliot refused. I'm not a crook, he said, turning to leave. That's when the world went black. He woke hours later, bound and battered, being dragged to a secluded bridge outside the base. You should have taken the deal, Pierce sneered as they tossed him into the rushing creek below. The cold water swallowed him, but Elliot fought, breaking free of the ropes and clawing his way to shore. Bruised, bleeding, and with a gash on his head, he staggered to the one person he could trust, his twin sister, Evelyn Harper. Evelyn, a soldier stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, had recently moved closer to Fort Bragg to be near her brother. When Elliot arrived at her doorstep, barely conscious, she was horrified. They tried to kill me, he gasped, recounting the documents and the attack.
Evelyn's eyes blazed with fury.
As twins, they were nearly identical, same dark eyes, same sharp features, same lean build from years of military training. That's when she hatched a plan. She would take Elliot's place, infiltrate the unit, and gather the evidence needed to bring Hayes and Pierce down. Evelyn spent the weekend transforming herself into Elliot. She cut her hair to match his buzz cut, bound her chest to hide her figure, and practiced his voice until it was indistinguishable. In his uniform, she was his mirror image, down to the way he carried himself. But there was one complication she hadn't anticipated: she was pregnant. She'd ended a relationship months earlier, unaware of the life growing inside her. As she prepared to assume Elliot's identity, the first signs of nausea hit, but she pushed them aside. Justice for her brother came first. On Monday morning, Evelyn boarded the bus as Elliot, her heart pounding as she faced Captain Hayes and Sergeant Pierce. They scrutinized her, searching for any sign of recognition, but her performance was flawless. She played the part of a disoriented soldier, claiming memory loss from the accident. Mason, though suspicious of her odd behavior, was too relieved to see his friend alive to question it deeply. The mission in Pisgah began, and Evelyn threw herself into the role, enduring the grueling training while hiding her growing pregnancy. The forest was unforgiving, swelteringly humid, crawling with insects, and relentless in its demands. Evelyn struggled to keep up, her body betraying her with morning sickness and fatigue. She avoided group showers, changed in private, and wore oversized uniforms to conceal her swelling belly. Mason noticed her withdrawal, her lack of shared memories, but she deflected his questions with vague excuses. "Head injury messed me up," she'd say, forcing a laugh. But the physical changes were harder to hide. By the second month, her stomach was noticeably rounded, drawing curious stares from the other soldiers. Hayes and Pierce, meanwhile, grew increasingly paranoid. They'd expected Elliot to die in the creek, yet here he was, alive and seemingly oblivious. "He's faking it," Pierce whispered to Hayes during a strategy meeting. "He's going to remember, and when he does, we're screwed." Hayes nodded, his eyes cold. "We'll take care of it. The forest is a big place. Accidents happen." Their first attempt was the sabotaged boat, but Evelyn's quick thinking saved her. When that failed, they tried other traps: loose ropes on a climb, a faulty harness, but she was always one step ahead, her instincts sharpened by the need to survive. Mason's concern grew with every passing day. He caught Evelyn wincing during a march, her hand pressed to her stomach. "This isn't normal, Elliot," he said, his voice low to avoid the other's ears. "You're not eating right, you're pale, and your stomach it's like it's alive."
Evelyn's heart sank.
Mason was too perceptive, too loyal. She wanted to tell him the truth, but the risk was too great. If Hayes and Pierce suspected she wasn't Elliot, they'd kill her without hesitation. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice firm.
"Just trust me, Mason."
Back at Fort Bragg, after 3 months in the forest, the unit returned to a flurry of whispers. Evelyn's belly was now unmistakable, a tight, rounded dome that strained against her uniform. Soldiers joked behind her back, calling her the pregnant private, but she brushed it off, claiming digestive issues or water retention. In private, though, she was terrified. The pregnancy was progressing faster than she'd expected, and the pain was becoming unbearable. She needed to act fast to gather the evidence and get out before her secret was exposed. One night, she overheard Hayes and Pierce planning a card game with other officers, leaving their offices empty. It was her chance. Feigning illness, she excused herself from dinner and slipped into Hayes's office, her heart pounding as she rifled through his desk. There it was, a beige folder stamped with the army seal, filled with incriminating documents. Her hands shook as she photographed each page, her phone's flash illuminating forged budgets and offshore account numbers. This was the proof she needed to destroy them. But as she snapped the last photo, the door creaked open. Hayes and Pierce stood there, their faces twisted with rage. "You lying bastard," Hayes snarled, realizing she'd never lost her memory. Pierce lunged forward, but Evelyn was faster. She shoved the desk at them, scattering papers, and bolted through a back door, clutching her belly as pain ripped through her. She locked the door behind her, buying just enough time to stumble into the corridor where she ran straight into Mason.
Elliot, what's hell?
Mason exclaimed, catching her as she swayed. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged. "Get me out of here," she gasped.
Hospital, Anuvere, just go.
Mason didn't hesitate. He half-carried her to a military jeep, speeding toward the hospital as her screams grew louder. Behind them, Hayes and Pierce broke free, realizing their quarry had escaped.
"The hospital, he is growled.
That's where he's headed." The military hospital at Fort Bragg was a hive of activity, its corridors buzzing with nurses and medics. Mason burst through the doors, supporting Evelyn, who was doubled over in pain, her belly grotesquely swollen. "Help! He's hurting!" Mason shouted, his voice echoing through the reception.
"Doctor!"
Nathan Caldwell, still reeling from the night's chaos, took charge, guiding them to an exam room. As they wheeled Evelyn in, her screams intensified, each one a knife to Mason's heart. He'd never seen his friend like this, so vulnerable, so broken. In the operating room, Nathan prepared for a C-section, his mind still grappling with the impossible. Evelyn, still posing as Elliot, fought through the pain, her voice hoarse. "No surgery," she gasped. "I'll do this naturally." Nathan hesitated, but her determination was unshakable. As she began to push, the truth emerged in a way no one could have predicted. Her uniform pants, loosened in the chaos, revealed a body that wasn't male. Nathan's eyes widened, his breath catching as he realized the soldier before him was a woman. "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered, her voice soft and distinctly feminine.
"I'm not Elliot.
I'm Evelyn, his sister. I had to lie to protect him." Nathan froze, his mind racing to process the revelation.
The pain in Evelyn's eyes, the desperation in her voice at Almade Sensenau.
She was a woman, pregnant, and masquerading as her brother to infiltrate the unit. But there was no time for questions. The babies were coming, and Nathan snapped into action, guiding her through the delivery. The first cry pierced the air, followed moments later by a second. Twins, healthy and strong, their wails filling the room with life. Evelyn clutched them to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Nathan. "Don't tell Mason yet," she pleaded. "He can't know until it's safe." Nathan nodded, his own shock giving way to professional focus. The secret was out, but the danger was far from over. Outside, Mason sat in the waiting area, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. His best friend was in surgery, possibly giving birth, an idea so absurd it made his head spin. He replayed every moment of the past months, Elliot's strange behavior, the memory loss, the growing belly. Nothing added up. Then he heard footsteps heavy, purposeful, and looked up to see Captain Hayes and Sergeant Pierce storming into the hospital, their faces dark with intent.
Where's Harper?
Hayes demanded, his voice like a whip. Mason stood, his fists clenching.
In surgery.
What's this about?
Pierce's Eisnerrot.
What did he tell you? Mason's confusion deepened. Nothing. He's in pain, that's all.
What's going on?
But the two men didn't answer, pushing past him toward the operating room. Mason followed, his heart pounding, sensing danger but unsure of its source. Then, a figure appeared at the hospital entrance, limping and scarred but unmistakable. It was Elliot, the real Elliot. Mason's jaw dropped. What the hell? He stammered. Elliot's eyes were fierce, his voice rough.
Where's my sister? Mason blinked, the piece falling into place.
Sister?
You mean the guy in terre you?
Elliot shook his head, his face grim.
It's Evelyn.
She took my place to get proof against Hayes and Pierce. They tried to kill me. Before Mason could respond, shouts erupted from the operating room. Hayes and Pierce had burst in, their eyes locking onto Evelyn and her newborns. You're coming with us, Hayes snarled, but Evelyn's voice cut through the tension, clear and defiant. I'm not who you think I am. The men froze, their confusion palpable as they took in the sight of a woman where they'd expected a man. Then the door opened again, and Elliot stepped in, his presence commanding despite his injuries. It's over, Elliot said, his voice steady. Evelyn sent me the photos of your documents. The police have everything.
Jure Done.
Hayes lunged, but Mason was faster, tackling him to the ground. Pierce reached for his sidearm, but Elliot disarmed him with a swift move, his training overriding his injuries. The room erupted in chaos, nurses shouting for security as the twins' cries filled the air. The hospital room fell silent as security dragged Hayes and Pierce away, their faces pale with defeat. Evelyn lay on the bed, her newborns cradled against her, her eyes locked on her brother. Elliot stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a silent promise of protection. Mason, still reeling, sat in a corner, his mind struggling to process the truth. His best friend wasn't Elliot, at least, not the Elliot he'd thought. It was Evelyn, a woman who'd risked everything to save her brother and expose corruption. The story unraveled in the hours that followed. Elliot explained how he'd uncovered Hayes and Pierce's embezzlement scheme, how they'd attacked him and left him for dead. Evelyn, his twin, had taken his place, using their uncanny resemblance to infiltrate the unit. Her pregnancy, unexpected and complicating, had nearly derailed her mission, but her determination held firm. She'd gathered the evidence, sent it to Elliot, and ensured justice would be served.
Doctor.
Nathan Caldwell listened, his shock giving way to admiration. He'd seen countless births, but none as extraordinary as this. Evelyn's courage, her willingness to endure pain and danger for her brother, was unlike anything he'd witnessed. He promised to keep her secret until she was ready to reveal it, ensuring her safety as the authorities took over. Elliot returned to Fort Bragg, promoted to captain for his bravery in exposing the corruption. He wore his new rank with pride, his scars a testament to his survival. Evelyn, meanwhile, stepped back from military life, focusing on her twins. She let her hair grow out, traded her brother's uniform for civilian clothes, and embraced her role as a mother. But her spirit remained that of a soldier, fierce, unyielding, and fiercely protective. Mason struggled to reconcile the deception but came to admire Evelyn's sacrifice. He and Elliot rebuilt their friendship, their bond stronger for the truth they'd faced together. The hospital, once a place of chaos, became a symbol of triumph, a place where a sister's love and a brother's resilience brought down a corrupt empire. The story of the pregnant soldier became legend at Fort Bragg, whispered in barracks and mess halls. But for those who lived it, it was more than a tale. It was a testament to loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between siblings. As the sun rose over the base, casting golden light through the hospital windows, Evelyn looked at her twins, then at Elliot and smiled. Justice had been served, and their family was whole.